And just so happened, I looked up and I saw this little disc thing moving, like, and it was followed by 2 military jets. But it was a secret because in my community, that's not something that you go and talk about. Extraterrestrials wasn't abducting us, why not? It's like, okay, we done been on ships in the past. We're not getting on another ship without a destination, period. The younger people are now being what I consider emotionally and religiously bankrupt. You start thinking, wait a minute, free energy, no billions. Free energy, no billions. Lock the door. Tell everyone, your eyes are useless when your mind is blind. We got to get past the point where we see things, but our mind won't let us interpret it. People ask all the time, Roderick, what do the ETs look like? And then I say, I don't know if you want my answer. And I'm glad you just asked me.
One community that we hear very little from regarding the fascination with UFOs is African Americans. Yet some of the better-known tribes of Africa, such as the Dogons, believe they're from the stars, that ETs are their star brothers and sisters. So why the lack of interest here? Roderick Martin is here to fill us in on the background of African Americans in your history with UFOs in America.
Yes, that's good. We're going to talk about it.
It's good to have you here, Roderick.
I'm glad to be here with you.
So let's first of all start up with you, because it's not part of the culture.
No.
But as a little kid, you had interest. So let's talk about you personally, where your interest in UFOs came from to set the stage for this.
Well, Regina, I think for me it started when I was 12 years old. Now, I lived in Dallas, near the Dallas Zoo, so outside of hearing all those animals and gorillas and lions in the middle of the night, one night, I was coming in, and my mom had this thing about flashing the porch light when it's time to come in the house.
Right.
And so at that point, she's flashing, so I'm taking the stroll of, well, at that point, shame, because I'm the only kid coming in early, and everybody else, yeah. So it was right when the night stars began to come out, so it was right at darkness. And just so happened, I looked up and I saw this little white disc thing moving, like, and it was followed by 2 military jets. And then it came back and actually it was following them. And at the moment, I did not realize the significance of that moment, but I did know I was looking at something that wasn't normal. And in fact, of course, I've watched TV, so I figure I'm like, And it just had my curiosity. It's my Scooby-Doo thing. I'm like, what was that? But as the years and months passed by, and then I started watching a TV show. She talking Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Just all of these shows, that's when you knew this was what it was. But it was a secret because in my community, that's not something that you go and talk about. Even the neighborhood bully wasn't going to be sitting on the corner like, I saw a UFO last night, and street credit gone. It's gone. Yeah, he's not taking my lunch money no more, So I wasn't a neighborhood bully either. But the whole point was, it's just something that was unspoken, and of course it carried with me until an adult, until I started realizing there was a place to talk about that.
But did you talk to your mom or anybody about, did you tell?
No.
No, so you just kept it to yourself.
Yeah, you kept it to yourself. And then I became a high school athlete. You became well known. And so it's still, how did I know at a young age that this could hurt my reputation, especially street credit, period. That was a lot those days.
Yeah.
And so growing up in high school, so I'm like, no, I'm not going to talk about it. And I may have whispered it every now and then if someone else said something. But outside of that, no.
And it turns out since then, I think we've all learned Texas is kind of a hotbed for a lot of UFO and military activity, right?
I tell people I live in the jumbo state where, where those UFOs come out to play.
Yeah, they do, and it's funny.
A Texas state.
Yeah, it's New Mexico gets all the attention, but the fact is there's a lot of activity that is both UFO and military and combined, the presence of both, a lot in the state of Texas. Have you ever figured out why that is?
Well, I think because we have this big area of land in Texas that just probably, I can't say totally explored, just not enough people don't live there.
Right,
so
it's very open.
Yeah, so it's a great place, even with higher intelligence, to know if they want to travel somewhere and not be seen. They'll probably do that. And I'm sure there's probably a lot of hidden military installations that they are observing. It's probably in those places. So it's got a lot of undercurrent things happening in Texas.
It does. A lot of cases come out of there. So when did you become aware that there were people talking about it, but they're all white?
Oh.
There actually was a whole field dedicated
more
to
than that,
talking
a whole
about
world.
it. A whole world
Yes.
dedicated to it. But being African American, you weren't aware of that world.
I wasn't, let's say, I saw it. I knew what I wasn't seeing. And I didn't have an answer at that time to why. And it didn't dawn on me now until I've done more research and understand cultural lenses and when it comes down to these things. But back then, yeah, that's all you saw was white people. And so you did think that that was it. They just, extraterrestrials wasn't abducting us. Why? Why not? And then I had my own running joke. You know, it's like, okay, we done been on ships in the past. We're not getting on another ship without a destination, period. So you're not getting me on one. So maybe they knew that. So I don't know. I just thought it was just kind of weird. It stuck there. And, you know, you just left it to the side. Then it became a reality. Then that's when I knew. Yeah.
Well, it turns out maybe they were.
Well, I think, yes. And I will believe that. And I believe that's those untold stories that's out there.
Okay, so let's talk about, at this time, the community. You had credibility that you were working with. You have the entire white world working against you and trying to make you less credible, right?
Right.
As a group. And so you're doing everything you can to just build credibility, to function in the United States, get educations, do your jobs, and so forth. You don't need this kind of embarrassment to come around in your community and in your background and talk about it, right?
So if you're referring back to someone reporting a UFO, okay, so let's go back and to think even white people then was being ridiculed for that.
Yes, they were.
Yeah, so both sides would be ridiculed. But then when it comes down to the African American community, where they're seen a little less credible, then therefore it's just not going to fan out with all of that. So now when you think about that as far as a black person and saying, okay, I'm gonna not only go and report this UFO sighting, and you already seem less credible on any other situations. And so it
Why
just,
bother?
Why bother? But then there's that other factor, you know, so think about back then, if we're going back into the 50s and 60s, you know, there was a lot of insult to injury. There was a lot of other stuff to worry about that was bigger in that trench walk to report something like that. So you could have been hung, you could have been lynched. There's just a lot of other variables. And nevertheless,
as an insane person.
As an insane person. So you probably had a guaranteed don't pass go, don't get out of jail, free car. I mean, you're going to go, you know, and you're going to be seen crazy, period. So, and that would just been like an added bonus.
So it was like what the whites at that time were doing, but on steroids in terms of its potential effect. Yet, interestingly, now just let's set the stage a bit. So in the 1950s and early 60s, you had a lot of these visitations in bell-shaped craft, beautiful people from Venus. You have George Adamski, you have Howard Menger, Frank Stranges writing about Stranger at the Pentagon and the beautiful Val Thor and the people he came with. These are just all white, all beautiful, well suited out, and they came to deliver messages. Val Thor, you read it said that he lived in a chamber in a room at the Pentagon for a couple of years.
Yes.
And he had regular conversations with President Eisenhower. Admiral Byrd's nephew worked there, Clarence, and said this is true. He was there and this did happen. And so they came with these messages like, you need to stop warring with each other, stop polluting the place, and eat better and you're going to live a long time. Simple messages.
Probably the message I didn't get.
Well, maybe you didn't get that one.
The eat better message did not get filtered down, and I'm the result of new disclosure from Val Thor. No, go
There
ahead.
you go.
I'm going to push that narrative.
So these were kind of cautionary tales done in a polite way. Now, this is where a black man did come in. You have Betty and Barney Hill.
Yes.
And that's one of the most famous abductions in history. And it's probably because it was the first one that was talked about as such, right?
Right.
So here you have them abducted. Now the story changes. You're not talking about gentlemanly and gentlewomanly Venusians coming here to deliver an important message. Now you're talking about hostile activity.
Yes.
Seemingly hostile activity. So let's talk about that and how that did or didn't change anything for blacks.
I don't think it changed anything. It didn't move the needle at all. Because anytime you still have, let's just say, the interracial couple thing,
Right.
that still doesn't validate
Right.
that whole situation just because it was just a little bit.
That's true. So many people were prejudiced just at the relationship.
And there you go. So we're not going to really take that into consideration of being something positive for sure. So when you think about Betty's background, I think she had enough clout in the community to at least to validate Barney being with her in that particular abduction. So until they were interviewed, where people start saying, wait a minute, the evidence is lining up that this actually could have happened. But still in the African American community, it's not something that was plastered over black newspapers, in those black communities where we would have read that or studied that, or black scientists or people would have been involved in that same scientific study.
So it was just kind of hushed. People didn't even know about it, really?
No, I mean, if you think about it, for me personally, I read the story later on in my career, and it still just stuck out. But it did, hang out there a little bit. But like, okay, this is an African American guy. But then when I started digging deeper, that's when I noticed there was a whole lot of things that could have been left out, which started my personal plight to uncover these things. So.
Okay. So let's go into the community itself. So you have the heavily religious aspect of the African American community. Now, we can even line this up with the heavily religious part of the Caucasian community.
Yes.
So let's talk about what happens when there's religion, deep religious beliefs involved, especially for African Americans, because I think it's quite different than for whites.
Yeah, I think so. You have to start with how we got here in the first place. So if you think of the story of us being brought here, stripped from the history of whatever our beliefs were, now you have this belief that we're being taught, at this point, Christianity for me. And then you start hearing, here's the book, here's how this works. Okay, so now that's already kind of disconnected anyway. So you still have this, curiosity of what we're currently dealing with. And all of a sudden, now you have this new element, this new outer space element, this new potential, the world is big thing, or there's people from other places and who are their gods, or what do they believe in? Are they transplanted here? Are they brought here? Or just all of these things begin to stir the pot. But when you start thinking about community side now, so let's say, okay, we have a report of a UFO. And I take it into my own personal account, my own story I'll share with you. But when you start hearing about it in the African American community, that's taboo. No, it can't be. There's nothing else besides
Our new God.
Yes, there's nothing else. I mean, this is absolute. The word is the word.
Because that's how it's taught.
That's how it's taught, and even from being a young kid. Now, for me, I had already had the different experience that there's something else there from my experience, and not everyone have had that experience, so they say. And so therefore, I was already kind of curious. And especially, my mom was always, hey, you stick into this word. The word is the absolute. And then one day I came across a scripture, Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Let's make man in our image, in the likeness of ourselves. Now, I've been to school. I understand our is plural. Ourselves mean more than one. And I'm like, unless we got a delusional God now,
Oh yeah, Genesis 1 and 2 are quite interesting to rub together.
And so I go to my mom and I'm like, hey, what is this? And of course, it's the Trinity. It's all of this stuff, but it just doesn't make sense. So you just shelve it. That's what I did. But then when I got a full-grown adult, I can talk for myself. I'm not going to get in trouble. There's no punishments behind me voicing my thoughts now, And I pay my own bills. And so for this point, I go, Mom, that is not that.
Right.